Welcome to the Coffee House, where in the next hour, creating a real job ladder for the poor. We'll talk with Maryland's Secretary of Labor and two other citizens who are seeking solutions. A look back on Inauguration Day 2001, we've got the view from the streets. Plus, sports writer Jim Naughton on rediscovering the higher meaning of sports through his son, while Ethelbert Miller searches for any meaning in the death of his uncle. Also, Washington Area Musician of the Year Lisa Moscatello is with us, as is award-winning travel author and storyteller Mike Tidwell. And we have a Laurie Sang poem with accompaniment by sax giant Antonio Parker. Come on in. This is important. Some economists warn a recession may be on the horizon. Fed Chairman Alan Greenspan says the economy is nearly at zero growth. So expect another round or 5 of corporate downsizing, layoffs, rising unemployment, and downward wage pressures. Right now, nationwide, just under 6 million people are on welfare. Another 6.5 million recently got off. But for how long? When the economy catches cold, the adage goes, the poor get pneumonia. The District of Columbia's lungs are already in critical condition, the highest rate of poverty in the country, and the worst case of income inequality. Virginia is doing better. The poverty rate there is slightly below the national average. Maryland is doing best of all, the top household income in the country and the lowest poverty rate. But Maryland has its problems: rising income inequality, a fifth of the workforce at poverty-level wages, and too many kids deprived of a decent start. What's being done about it? We'll hear from John O'Connor, Maryland Secretary of Labor, Licensing and Regulation, Patrice Cromwell, a Workforce and Economic Development Program Fellow at the Open Society Institute in Baltimore, and Bruce Herman, the Executive Director of the AFL-CIO's Working for America Institute. Welcome to the Coffee House.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, let's start with you. There is this danger on the horizon economically, yet a recent survey of Maryland employers indicates that they plan to actually increase the number of employees on their payrolls this year. What is your sense of where the economy is heading, and are we going to get people off of into the workforce?
The sense that we see is that we actually see a rise, not a recession in Maryland, if nothing else, the status quo, which would be the highest employment rate in history, is what we're experiencing right now. The problems that we do face are a continuing improvement in the workforce quality and the workforce skills, and that is being demanded by the number of employers looking for new help.
Now, what you're saying is that they are saying they don't see enough skilled people to fill the jobs that they have available?
Exactly, and in the construction industry is one area where they do not have the skilled. It's a critical area. You see the signs on the side of the road. Other areas, healthcare, do not have the adequate people to serve the needs that the healthcare industry needs. Teachers, as you know, there's been a big initiative by the governor to bring in 25,000 new teachers within the next 4 or 5 years, because we're going to meet that critical goal of the baby boomers retiring. But we have that through 3 or 4 other industries, as well as the hospitality industry. If you look at some of the others, IT, there's still a big demand for people with the basic abilities to operate high technical equipment and also perform some task along with it, have some skills training. So we see a need for using our training dollars to upgrade the skills of the incumbent worker, as well as the dislocated worker of the future, whose industry may be fading out and have to start some new career.
Patrice, your group, along with some others in Baltimore, recently did a survey of Marylanders' attitudes, and they found that a substantial portion of Marylanders don't think that even living above the poverty line, which for a family of 4 is $17,000, is sufficient income. What exactly did your survey find?
Well, we conducted Open Society Institute with ABLE and Casey Foundation a survey of about 800 voters, and these voters were all across the state, metropolitan and rural regions. And what we discovered from that survey, overwhelming majority of people felt that individuals were not, a large majority of the voters felt that people were having difficulty finding not just a job, but a good job. And what was also interesting is many individuals felt the individual had responsibility to take action, but an overwhelming number also felt that the government should have a major role in helping people get a job, but get a good job that can sustain a family and move them out of poverty. And looking at the numbers you just mentioned, 17,000 as the rate of poverty, many people, again, about 3/4 felt that individuals needed at least twice the rate of poverty, which would be between 25 and 35,000 to stay out of poverty or to move out of poverty.
Mr. Secretary, what's your attitude? What do you think is necessary for somebody in Maryland to have a sustainable income?
To have a sustainable income, let's just take the average income in Montgomery County is somewhere above $49,000 a year. And when someone says that to become above this poverty line is $17,000 according to a Department of Health and Human Services, that's ridiculous. I mean, people cannot maintain a family. You're at the basic line. You need to have health coverage. You need to have, for the instances, you need some kind of a child care. There's all kinds of things that go into the formula that would break down on that money. If you're at $17,000, there's no room for any emergencies or any other expenses. And let's face facts, all of us have been through those times, and we've all gotten through them, but you can't get through if you're at the minimum level of poverty and thinking you're going to be sustained. That's why we look for jobs, and when we put training funds out, the governor and the administration in Maryland has been using that money to try to find a career ladder type of occupation. We're not task training, we're training people for the future that they can actually expand their horizons and move up and experience what others have experienced in the world of work. And that's the satisfaction of growing more profitable and more knowledgeable of their skills.
Now that's got to be somewhat satisfactory to you, Bruce, given that I would assume that the labor movement is concerned that when the government plays a role in moving people into the workforce, that they're not essentially providing employers simply a cheap labor force at the bottom rungs, but are actually creating a job ladder to help people move out of poverty and to stay out.
Well, job ladders are essential in terms of providing working people with opportunities to increase their incomes, but also to access wages and benefits and working conditions that can sustain families. And this is very important for the Maryland economy. As we've heard, this is an economy that's doing well, but it's a very high-cost area in terms of obtaining middle class and obtaining the benefits that working people need to sustain their families. So we need career ladders that reward skill development, that allow upward mobility, and we also know we need those career ladders across occupations so that individuals, current workers, incumbent workers, can find opportunities to obtain middle class status and open up new opportunities for people entering the workforce.
Let's talk specifically now. Patrice, you've been associated with some programs in the Baltimore area and Maryland that are attempting to do that. Can you talk a little bit about them?
Sure. I think what Bruce has indicated, some of the best partnerships are focused on the continuum of workforce. And that means helping somebody get into a job, helping somebody think about how to advance in that job, and sometimes it may involve completely changing an industry or a sector within an area. For instance, healthcare, a program that's associated with the AFL-CIO is working to move nursing assistants up to higher levels, and it's been very successful through post-placement support. It's sort of a new...
Now, this is a profession that has, in some places, in South Florida, for instance, 100% turnover a year in the workforce.
Well, I think that's a great point, because what's working is when you have a community organization working with a union organization and working with employers. Employers have a lot at stake. They feel this economy, it's very hard to get employees, and they're investing in people because they realize it helps the bottom line.
Bruce, you have some experience nationally with some programs. Why don't you talk about that?
Yes, we have a national focus, and we look at many sectors of the economy. And what's particularly, I think, striking is that in some sectors where we see rapid job growth, we don't necessarily see the quality associated with those jobs that would allow working people to obtain family-sustaining wages and benefits. And these are often rapidly growing segments of our economy. Hospitality, healthcare are two that are significant job creators in many communities, in Maryland as well as in other communities. And we see very positive results in some communities where there are partnerships between labor, employers, and community organizations to build career ladders, to invest in training and education, and to provide adequate wages and benefits for working families. Where we don't see those partnerships, we don't see those outcomes. And the communities where we don't see those partnerships are at a disadvantage, and so are the people that are employed in those industries.
Are there any characteristics of those communities, a way to look at the map and say, well, we expect that over here we're not going to see those sorts of partnerships?
Well, I think some of the fundamental characteristics of those partnerships are the basic engagement between labor and management. That is the beginning or the essence of those partnerships. A firm public sector commitment to invest and support training and education and skill upgrade that leads to increased employment opportunities. Those are sort of the key characteristics. Where we see those elements, we see the positive outcomes for the community and for the working people that live in those communities. Where we don't, where we see missing components or missing certainly partnerships, then we do not see the outcomes that I think are of benefit to our communities.
Consistent with the experience of Giant, for instance?
Yeah, Giant was one of those, obviously is a big Maryland operation, and now it's branched out into other states. It came to us with a need for workers and training, and they have the training facility in themselves. Well, when we sat down with them and their union collective bargaining entities, they became very aware of what a wonderful program would be. It's part of the community that's reflecting on them. They win-win everywhere they went. And Giant, when they first went into the Welfare to Work program, the first class they had graduate had the highest retention rate of any class they had. And in fact, at the time, the chairman of the board, Pete Maness, says that was even as far as the executive board goes as far as retention. It was higher. But it was a very successful program, and it branched out to all of the food chains, as well as to a number of other large employers. They felt a need to be a part of it, and they've experienced some wonderful benefits from it. The fact that people were on a career ladder. It also set the stage for what the governor and what this administration has done with Welfare to Work. We're not out to, it is work first, but the idea is to move those people up and move them into something that's a sustainable job with sustainable wages.
And from your point of view, Patrice, is the state of Maryland doing its job at this point in moving people into the workforce onto job ladders?
I think the state and the various agencies, there are about 8 different agencies that have some workforce component, is doing a good job. There are a lot of good programs out there, and also more creative use of some of the federal dollars that are coming to the state.
And the private sector, are they doing their job?
I think there is more that can be done. I think we need to recognize this dual client approach. Both employers as well as the customers, the workers or the prospective workers need to be at the table. And I think, for instance, the governor has a workforce investment board that was recently reconstituted to encourage more active employer engagement. I think we, again, need to look at both sides of the situation. Since employers are willing to come to the table more, we need to think what benefits them and their bottom line, as well as what benefits workers and those that are seeking work.
I'm afraid that's going to have to be the last word. Patrice Cromwell from the Open Society Institute, Bruce Herman from Working for America Institute, and Secretary John O'Connor. Thank you for joining me in the coffee house. Still ahead, Whammy Artist of the Year, Lisa Moscatello, sports writer Jim Naughton, Ethelbert Miller on the quiet death of his uncle, World Culture's storyteller Mike Tidwell, a Laurie sang poem, and Inauguration Day 2001, the view from the streets.
Inauguration without representation. There's a good one. Yeah.
Hi, and welcome to a second look at the Coffee House. Up close and personal, the people who inhabit big-time professional sports are not always a pretty picture. Far from it. Set aside if you want the guys who've had to stand trial for murder and rape in recent months. There's still a long list of boozers, adulterers, egomaniacs, backstabbers, you name it. For a professional sports writer, it's hard to hang on to any illusions. Even harder to believe you could stand out on a baseball diamond with young children and find again some of the idealism sports once represented. Jim Naughton, who has seen plenty of the raw side of sports in his professional life, never expected to be standing out on a pitcher's mound with his kid, and yet there he was. What happened next? Well, Jim is here to tell us. Jim, welcome back to the Coffee House.
Hey, Howard. Thanks for having me.
Before you give away the punchline, let's go back to your period of disillusionment. So you're a sports writer. You're hanging out in the bigs.
Right.
Tell us about it.
Well, I think because I came to it sort of right out of college, and I covered the New York Rangers at the New York Times, and then later I covered the Mets for the Daily News, but also traveled around in baseball and basketball, a little bit in football. It was a big culture shock for me to see the way that people lived when they were on the road, and it was a big culture shock for me to see the sort of casual contempt in which most athletes seem to hold almost all sports writers, but also most fans too. There was just kind of a dismissive attitude and a sense that they were somehow above sort of the mass of humanity.
Well, give us an example. I mean, let's say.
I mean, like.
Even how contemptuous could they get? Give us an extreme.
Well, there are things that you wouldn't say on television.
Okay.
People would,
Well, stop short of an extreme.
If you were in someone's locker area and they wanted you to get out of their locker area, they could they would make sure that they said that in as colorful a language as possible.
Right.
Suggest you perform biologically impossible tasks or whatever. But also just a sense of there was, what do I want to say? There was an attitude about women that was extremely misogynistic. There was an attitude about, there was kind of an anti-intellectualism that ran through the whole thing, a kind of unwillingness to analyze anything, but also just a sense of being wrapped in a cocoon of privilege so tightly that anything that came in that was a bother could just be sort of flicked off.
And are we talking just about the stars or the run-of-the-mill big-time athlete?
No, now there are plenty of guys and gals who are who do the grunt work
decent
and
folk.
who are decent folks, but the egomaniac character we're not just talking about stars there. I mean, you can go into minor league clubhouses and find guys who are sure they're going to be in the majors in 2 years and are already sort of trying out, what kind of jerk attitude that they'll be carrying once they get there. So there's just a sense that my immediate needs are the most important thing in the world, and I owe nothing to anybody else, not even common courtesy. And I'm not talking here about like guys who won't sign autographs. Guys are besieged for autographs all the time. They do have to claim some personal time. They have to say, no, I'm off limits right now. And fans get upset about that, and I think they just have to, deal with it. But I'm talking about people who just in their everyday interactions, whether it's with a sports writer, whether it's with a guy in a clubhouse, people who work for them, I'll tell you a story once where I can't remember the exact incident, but Mike Lupica, who was writing a biography of Reggie Jackson at the time, and Reggie did something to two fans that was extremely nasty. And somebody asked Mike, who was on hand, because he was just sort of observing what was going on, he said, why does he do that? And Lupica said, because he can.
Right.
And that's it. I mean, we hold these people in such esteem that we're willing to let them get away with things that, we'd never let another kind of person get away with.
Okay, well, let's now jump ahead. So now you're a dad. You have a couple of young sons, and one of them's baseball age. And your inclination is not necessarily to steer him onto the baseball diamond.
Yeah. Well, in my family, we're all small. And in my wife's family, they weren't athletes either. And I know that a lot of American kids, and I think it's particularly true for boys because they're sort of held to some kind of macho standard, their failures at sports sort of haunt them all their lives. It makes their adolescence really miserable. It makes them, less popular than the big jocks, all that kind of thing.
But having said that, you actually take your kid out there,
yeah, well,
not only as his dad, but as his coach, right?
Well, it turns out, I mean, on the one hand, it's terrible for a lot of kids to be exposed to the way the game is played as a very sort of win at all costs kind of thing. On the other hand, for a lot of kids, and particularly, kids like my son Ben, sports is where they find themselves. Some kids trust themselves more when they're moving than when they're standing still. And for those kids, they need games. They need games to socialize them. They need games to sort of draw them out of themselves. They need games to feel like they're part of a big drama in ways that maybe school doesn't do for them or other activities don't do for them.
So your son Ben, who is what now, 10, right?
He'll be 10 in March, yeah.
Is now essentially an all-star quality baseball player. You're his coach in his age group, and there's a happy kind of story involved here. Or so far, there's a happy ending to this story, which you've written about in the front page of the Post magazine.
There's, I think, for me, what it comes back to is that there's something elemental about play, in the way that there's something elemental about work or eating or sleeping, or other kinds of, sort of very vibrant self-expression. And they can be as corrupted, the games can get as corrupted as possible, as we know, on a higher level, on the professional level, on the collegiate level. But on the kid level, if you, as a parent or a coach, can get in there and say, look, we're going to do this because it's a great thing to do. We're going to do it for its own sake. And I don't care if you're ever famous. I don't care if you win. But while we do this, you're going to respect the game and you're going to play it hard, and I bet you're going to find a lot of fun in it. Well, that can work magic with kids that age.
Well, that's true, but let me pose a couple of hypotheticals now,
Okay.
because now even presumably no one on your all-star team is necessarily going to go to the big someday,
Right.
but you're in the position as a coach of influencing those guys, the type of athletes who do end up there someday. So the theory is, I mean, one theory is coaches pamper the stars, right?
Right.
And you know, the Allen Iversons of the world,
Sure.
he never had to act responsibly
Right.
until he reached his 20s. But take a kid like Iverson, you know, if he's not given a little pampering, doesn't he just drop out? If you treat him rough and tough, doesn't he drop out and then he's on the streets and he's cheated out of that opportunity?
I think there's a trade-off. I mean, I don't know enough about what Allen Iverson grew up
Right.
with to speak about him, but I think there's a
Or
trade-off.
just use him as a stereotype.
Well, let's say you've got a kid on your team who is obviously a terrific player and has phenomenal potential, but is an incredibly disruptive presence on your team. You have to think of the welfare of everyone involved, and you have to say to yourself, who am I hurting by trying to help this kid? Who am I? If I let him bully other kids, or if I sort of make the team revolve around him because he's talented, what am I saying to all the other kids on this team? I'm not saying that if you work hard, I'm going to respect you. I'm not saying that following the rules is important. I'm not saying that we're all working together for a broader goal. I'm saying, this guy's great. Watch out. I just have to make the world revolve around him so that we'll win all the time. Well, that's why by the time, when you get to the major league level or the NBA, NFL, whatever, everybody on that level, including the bench warmers, including the people who are on the taxi squads, including people who barely missed the cut, they were all fabulous 17-year-old players. They were all the best player in their town. Well, they've all then had that sort of ego training of how wonderful a person they are. And, it's a lot to ask a kid to overcome that and not get big-headed.
Okay, all right. But then, all right, let's say you're able to achieve that balance within your own team and within your own players, and you treat them all well, and they respect you and respond well. Now you're out in the All-Star tournament, and
I want to win.
Exactly, you want to win it. Your opposing coach is not cut from the same cloth as you are. He has done anything he could to win, and now you're in a tight situation. I mean, what do you cross the line? Do you
I
for
don't
the
know.
sake of victory?
I think the real risk in that situation, I think, is less crossing the line for the sake of victory than if you do think that the opposing team is not fair, or if you think they're setting a terrible example about the way the game is being played. It makes you want to beat them more. And as a result, it's almost like the game doesn't count. It's like, my philosophy must win. And if the philosophy is that winning's not that important, to suddenly say it must win is dumb. But it's hard to keep it in check.
Well, it is. It's a dilemma, and sports, of course, is full of these dilemmas, which you will, I guess, address one by one now in the next several months and years.
Every day brings up another, how do you handle a certain kid in a certain situation? Have I been too hard on this kid? Have I been too easy on this kid?
Okay. We're going to wrap it up,
Sure.
but tell me your dream now of where you and Ben end up.
Well,
In a few quick seconds.
I have Ben and I have my younger son, Chris. And for Ben, this has been a way of sort of exploring the world and feeling great about himself and getting out there. And as long as that's the horse he can ride towards that, that's what I want for him. And for Chris, I want him to find his horse and ride it.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you for joining us in the coffee house. It's a pretty cynical adult world out there, even in sports. And we'd all like to believe we can escape from that world out on a baseball diamond with our kids. How nice to find out it can actually come true. Still to come, a remembrance by Ethelbert Miller, a Laurie Sang poem, and world traveler Mike Tidwell. But first, Whammy Artist of the Year, Lisa Moscatello, I'm Howard Cohen, and this has been A Second Look.
Wake up, little Maggie. Why do you sleep so sound? The highway robbers are raging, and the sun is going down. The highway robbers are raging, and the sun is going down. I wrote my love letter. This is the way it went. It said, in this world you will have trouble, but never hang down your head. Said, little Maggie, you will have your trouble, but never hang down your head. 'Cause I was crossing the cold icy mountain. It was so chilly and so cold. Fare thee well, little Maggie, I never see you anymore. Said, fare thee well, little Maggie, I never see you anymore. The last time I saw little Maggie, she was standing in the door. She said, fare thee well, loving Jimmy, I never see you anymore. She said, fare thee well, loving Jimmy, I never see you anymore. Wake up, little Maggie. Why do you sleep so sound? Highway robbers are raging, the sun is going down. Highway robbers are raging, the sun is going down. 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 So the sun is going down. The sun is going down. And the sun is going
My uncle died last week. He lived in Baltimore. I didn't attend his funeral. Baltimore is a place I visit now and then. It's the closest place where you can see Major League Baseball. I saw more games than I saw my uncle. In fact, the last time I might have seen him was at my father's funeral. I think he was there. I can't remember. My father and my uncle were half-brothers. Half? How do you divide people? Is this equality? Was Cain equal to Abel? Lately, I've been thinking too much about my family. Years ago, my uncle came to our apartment in the Bronx with Aunt Connie and her dog. Aunt Connie was the first really ever black woman I saw. She was darker than everyone and wore tight dresses, and they were red and filled with perfume, and when she hugged you, the smell of her perfume made you dizzy. I liked Aunt Connie, but when I got older, I thought about her the way I did Billie Holiday, a blues woman, entering a club and finding her man with someone else. When my uncle left the house with Aunt Connie, my father looked like a man whose luggage had been lost at the airport. A trace of perfume filling the house, choking him and reminding him about how his life was reduced to a job in the post office, bills on the table, and 3 kids to feed, and maybe a vacation during the summer, and a chance to go on to the beach, or just sleep late and dream about the cards in his hand. Kings, queens, and jacks. I was sitting in the living room years later, the last time I saw my father and uncle together. They were both in the living room, but my uncle was talking to my mother in the kitchen. I sat on the sofa, listening to the conversation like it was a cold meal being placed in a microwave. I sneaked a look at my father the way a pitcher holds a runner to first base. What I saw on his face was disgust and anger. I had never seen this look on my father's face, and I never forgot it. It was my father's face that told me that this was his brother, not his friend. A ribbon of flesh holding them together like a label stuck on a shirt you can't remove without help. My father sat in a chair, listening to my uncle and mother talking. He said nothing. He only rose and nodded his head when my uncle said he had to leave and return to Baltimore. Two men, born from the same womb, separated by cities and their mother's lovers. Two boys wanting to hold their mother's hand as she tries to cross the street with a bag of groceries. She can only hold one hand, so she reaches for my uncle's small fingers, and they slide into hers as my father pushes his hands into his own empty pockets. That joker got religion now, my father says, as my mother closes the door. My father's words are spit catching the curb in front of his shoes, but he is indoors, and so the words just have the smell of spit. My mother is upset by the remark, but she is a woman who has washed her hands so often that nothing leaves a mark or stain. Her memory is clean, and she forgets the past. She forgets that it was faith and prayer that placed a roof over her head and food on the table. It was religion and a belief in God that protected my father in those cold nights when he came home from work. My father didn't have to read the Bible or quote scripture. He only had to look at my brother, sister, and myself and count his blessings. And maybe they were nights when he didn't want to come home. And maybe a woman like Aunt Connie had a sweet song she was singing and the drinks were being passed around, and maybe he wanted to put his arm around her, but instead he caught the train back home. Maybe when men are half-brothers, they look for the other half somewhere else. Billie Holiday once lived in Baltimore and often sang, "What is this thing called love?" and "God bless the child." I think men were often left with tears in their eyes and nothing else after she sang. I think some wanted the flower in her hair to be placed on their graves.
She spreads her wings and runs to the edge of herself. Seductive as a kiss, voluptuous as a heartbeat, she soars into the chasm where anything is possible, ecstasy or betrayal. She sails over the breach. Below her, the earth lies cleaved in two, quivering and open. There's a man standing on the ground with a hatchet. He's smiling. No, wait. He's crying, as if he's lost something precious, maybe. It's hard to tell. From here, he seems so small. Climbing into the sunlight, she sparkles like a diamond or a tear. The air shifts. There's a rumbling like laughter or hunger. Hope gathers again, soft and heavy, into the clouds. Begins to rain. Gravity tugs at her heart like a kite string. ancestral bones, childhood mementos. She breathes deeply. The taste fills her mouth, a memory of black dirt, bitter as chocolate. She recalls the smell, dusky and sweet, calling her back to the rich, warm earth that she loves.
Welcome to Writer's Block at the Coffee House. Travel writing is in a league by itself. In theory, it's journalistic since it relays information, but it goes way beyond the usual news story. Travel writing is actually more like fiction writing thanks to its descriptive properties and dramatic effects. Its goal is to initiate the reader to new worlds, to navigate the twists and turns of other cultures, and to embrace the exotic. In other words, it's about adventure and surprise. Writer Mike Tidwell is a master at this. His stories include intimate descriptions of people and places from all over the world. His new book, In the Mountains of Heaven, Tales of Adventure on 6 Continents, includes everything from a Vietnamese barber to an American laundromat repairman, with backdrops of stunning description along the way. Mike Tidwell has written 3 previous books. His work has appeared in Reader's Digest, National Geographic Traveler, and The Washington Post. He lives in Tacoma Park. Welcome to the Coffee House.
Thank you.
In this collection of essays, you come back home. You talk about the importance of home in terms of your travels and what it means to you. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I had an uncle who, when I first started to travel fairly seriously, stopped me after I'd probably spent a little bit too much time describing a recent trip and said, but you know, Mike, one of the best parts of travel is coming home, don't you? And I always thought, you know, that made sense to me, and I think one of my favorite parts of traveling now, especially the older I get, is coming back home. It's good to travel, it's good to see interesting places, but it's good to come home and have those experiences and be able to tell your friends and family, but to be back where you are. And Tacoma Park's a great place to call home.
And you started your travels basically going to visit this uncle. That was the laundromat. Could you talk about that in Montana?
Yeah, I was a sort of a ski bum in Montana, and had hitchhiked down to visit my Uncle Barry in Denver, Colorado, and this was in 1982, I believe, and it was a really snowy Thanksgiving Eve, and I hitched a ride with I was hitchhiking and hitched a ride with a laundromat repairman who was going from Bozeman, Montana to Denver, Colorado, but making numerous stops along the way to fix broken washing machines at washaterias all over the West. And so it was that alone was quite an experience. When I showed up at my uncle's house on Thanksgiving morning, snowy Thanksgiving morning, he barely recognized me. I was nearly frozen to death since the heater in this guy's van wasn't working properly. But it was that same Thanksgiving that my uncle gave me a copy of Jack Kerouac's On the Road. And, you know, that book didn't make me, you know, this Kerouac didn't become my godhead or anything. But what I got from Kerouac was that it was all right to want to travel ambitiously. You know, it didn't make you a freak to want to collect stamps in your visa from, you know, gruff Border Patrol guys and from countries only Scrabble devotees can pronounce, you know. And so I think it was that experience and my uncle's own love for travel and reading Kerouac long ago that sort of got me on this long journey.
Well, and your journeys are always have sort of a twist to them. There's always something, a little surprise in them. That's what I was talking about when I said it's kind of like fiction. One of yours is about the barber in Hanoi, and he says, what does he say to you when as he's sharpening his razor, and he talks about the Americans that he...
Right. Yeah, I found myself in Hanoi in 1995 on a writing assignment, and I'd been out of the country. I'd been gone for quite a while, and if you travel long enough, you're going to need a haircut sooner or later.
Right.
And I've had the fortune or misfortune to have haircuts all over the world. And so the first essay in this book, In the Mountains of Heaven, is about haircuts that I've had all over the world. And it begins with this haircut I had outdoors on the streets of Hanoi under a mimosa tree next to a Buddhist temple. And this guy was cutting my hair, and first he wanted to give me a shave, and so he's lathering up my face, and he has this straight razor, and he's got the razor on my neck, and he's saying, "You're from America?" And I said, "Yeah," and he said, "Yeah, I killed a lot of Americans during the war," and then I felt the razor on my throat like this. But I was a Peace Corps volunteer in 1984 to 87 in what is now called the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and my job was to teach fish culture. And my 2.5 years in the Congo were by far the most formative period of my life. I learned much more in 2.5 years of living in this virtually prehistoric village than I learned in 5 years of college. And really what I learned was in those 2 years I got sick, I was lonely, I had malaria 5 times, and the people of this village took care of me. Wow. And they really adopted me as a family member. And that taught me, that informed me as a writer, and it directs me even now. It gives me the courage to go into places like Hanoi and see a barber on the street and say, I know that guy can cut my hair and I'm going to be okay. I'm not going to be hurt. Or I can hitchhike on Cajun shrimp boats throughout the Bayou region of Louisiana among French-speaking Cajuns and know that they'll take care of me. And it goes back to Africa where I was taken care of. And so I have this confidence that I can throw myself into the convulsions of the world wherever I land. I know that people are going to take care of me if I'm respectful of their culture and I show an authentic curiosity about who they are, not about why I'm here and what I'm doing, but who they are. And if you approach a cross-cultural experience with that perspective, you will get a good story and you will learn something about who you are and probably learn better that at the end of the day we are all made from the same clay.
You said a little bit about the golden age of travel and how some people think that it's over, but you don't.
Well, it's really fashionable to say that travel is over. There are no good journeys left in the world. I hope my book, In the Mountains of Heaven, shows that that's not the case. If by great, the golden era of travel, or by great travel you mean discovering a new river or a lost civilization, or mapping a part of the map that's blank, well, then the golden age of travel is over, because there are no civilizations left to find. There are no rivers left to discover. But if by great travel you mean going to places where you are definitely different as an American, going to places where you can learn a lot about what it means to be human and be exposed to interesting cultures. In this book alone, I get marooned on a desert island. I get caught in a rock slide on the Rio Grande. Ride horses with nomadic shepherds along the Silk Road in Central Asia. So great travel is out there. I guess as I get older, though, I realize that there's a great responsibility that comes with travel. The travel industry is not necessarily one that's done a lot of favors for cultures all over the world. And
well, it's commercial travel.
Right.
I think what you're talking about is that's not really what you're interested in.
Right. I'm more into just telling stories about people I meet along the way. But I will say that just in the last few years, I'm concerned with the planet, not just as a travel writer, but as the health of the planet, because the planet is rapidly warming due to climate change, due to carbon dioxide and other pollutants that we're putting into the earth. And I think that we as citizens of the planet have to stop solely looking at the earth as a playground or as a place to have meaningful cross-cultural experiences, but start to realize that we are finally really all in this together. Global warming involves all of us, and we have to come to terms with it. Just last week, the United Nations released yet another report that says that the planet will probably warm by a good 10 degrees in this century. So I think that's something we have to keep in mind. Those of us who enjoy traveling the planet, there's a lot of added responsibility we have now as planetary citizens.
And I think that comes through in the book, particularly towards the end when you write about the Congo, and you also mention your girlfriend's hair being clipped as completely apart from a barber experience. But that you talk about the living simply and not wasting
The
and
Perfect
the
Society.
culture.
I've
yes.
seen it. Yeah,
Yes.
I've seen The Perfect Society, and I had a chance in 1987 to visit a band of Mbuti pygmies in the Ituri forest of northern Congo, and just saw a culture that the likes of which I've never seen since or had seen before, a culture that really is about hunting and gathering and in a sustainable way. And certainly, if my brief experience was any indication, and I've read about the Mbuti people since then, a culture that is full of a lot more bliss and satisfaction than just about any culture that I've met, that I've encountered. And so I end this book with this story about this trip into the Ituri forest and seeing these people who can build a house in 10 minutes, who can build you a chair with whatever happens to be lying around in the jungle, and while you're standing there introducing yourself. And
They made backpacks too.
backpacks, and they hunt in a way so that they don't overhunt. They move. I mean, they happen to live in a jungle that's characterized by what anthropologists call environmental abundance. I mean, they have a lot around them that they can eat. So we don't have that all over the world, but there's a lot to be said for a culture that is respectful of where they gain their wealth. And I think these people were more cognizant of that than certainly your Western culture, which is now spreading to all ends of the planet. And it's something that we have to think about.
Although I'll go back to the whole concept of home here, because one of the things that you say in terms of these pygmy people, but you also do with so many of the characters, the people in the Andes, the people in the South, is their hospitality, their warmth, their kindness to you. They're inviting you to their world and making you comfortable. And that's sort of the magic of these essays to me, is you'll even be in precarious conditions when you go to see the antipode of Washington, D.C. in Australia, and you're trying to jump on this little rock with barnacles that can rip your feet apart, and the waves are, you know, you're showing the warmth of the Australians who've gotten you there in the first place. And
I think that goes back to my experience in a small village in Africa. I was so...
And we have 1 minute.
Okay. I was so well taken care of that I realized that if you will be taken care of by people all over the world if you are respectful of their culture and you're really interested in them.
Right.
And so in all these stories, wherever I wind up, again, the bayous of Louisiana, a fishing village in southwestern Australia, an Mbuti clan in the Ituri forest of the Congo, I can enter these worlds and know that if I'm really interested in them, if you show a genuine, an authentic degree of curiosity, people all over the world will embrace you and take care of you, and that makes traveling fun. And it makes
you as a writer, though, you also embrace them. That's where I recommend the book, is that it's a mutual exchange. So, thanks to Mike Tidwell for sharing some of his adventures with us. Again, his new book is In the Mountains of Heaven. I'm Lisa Page, and this has been Writer's Block.
There are cards on the table, an empty bottle of wine. The smoke is now clearing. Desire, my guide. Soft guards, how they whisper as we open the gates. With passion, my weapon, as night draws the shades, and I am one, but I feel too, and I hear, oh, I hear three, all I know. Is I wanna be with you right now. I wanna be with you right now. Soft guards, how they whisper as we open the gates. With passion, my weapon, as night draws the shade. I am one, but I feel, oh, I feel too. And I hear, oh, I hear three. All I know is I wanna be with you right now. I wanna be with you right now.
That's it for this show. See you next time in The Coffee House.